There's a big conversation that we need to have tonight, and let's have it. Let's face this head on. I mean, why is this relevant? If you look at the context of everything else that is happening in this economy since January, one of the major things has been workers clamoring for better pay, clamoring, asking for more. It started with UTAG on a prolonged strike. They want a better conditions of service. And the economy, of course, is still in tatters, it's still in crisis. But the workers say, yeah, we deserve a bit more. The cost of living is going up. Inflation is eating away what we already earn. And so we deserve more. So that conversation has been ongoing. And here on PM Express, we've had that conversation for months. And then over the weekend, the government statistician, who of course is also now a fully fledged professor, was at his inaugural lecture at the University of Cape Coast. And speaking in that capacity, gave us pause for thought when he suggested that, listen, the workers appears to be earning a lot, not linked to productivity. I work in the private sector. I know the value of productivity because that is how I am judged by my employers. And I'm paid based on what they believe my output is. And so let's pause a minute. Here on PM Express, we've talked a lot about the worker's salary, the conditions of the worker. We've had a whole show just talking to public sector workers about how they are surviving. But on the back of that inaugural lecture, tonight, we're going to have a different conversation. Enough about demand for better pay. What about productivity? Do they really deserve what they're asking for? It is a conversation we are going to have tonight. We're going to hold the workers' feet to the fire a bit more on the back of a conversation that was started by Professor Ining. That's the man there. And he delivered his professorial speech, which has become a subject of some great controversy. And his point was simple. What people earn should be equal to their output and be equal to what they spend. And he says a basic principle is what you earn must also be equated to what you produce. It is absolutely critical. Do the workers deny that this is an essential part of calculating anybody's salary? That what you take home must reflect your output, your productivity? We'll put that to the workers who will join us very shortly. And so he broke this down. He's done the maths. And he says, on the average, workers in the public sector are taking home 3,420 CDs. But then, if you compute what the output is, you only get 1,420. There's a significant disparity between how much we are paying the workers and how much they are giving us in return. The difference in monetary terms is 2,000 CDs. And if you compute it into percentage, you're talking about 41% gap, 41%, 41% gap in the difference that we are beginning to see. And so that is a significant difference between what we pay them and what they produce. So this is alarming, right? You can argue that you're slightly being overpaid compared to your productivity. Because in private sector, the two go hand in hand. Once you're assessed and you're deemed to be producing, I'm judged on a few things. So audience share, how many eyeballs I'm getting on PMX, for example, is linked to how much is in my pocket at the end of the year, for example, right? And so if I'm getting 0 audience share and yet you're paying me an increase, what's the basis of that? So that's a conversation that the government statistician started. It's a very good one to have. In the context of all the negotiations happening right now for minimum wage, base pay, let's have this conversation also. He makes the point. A few recommendations. Create a public productivity committee of parliament, like the Public Accounts Committee, to ensure that. And then he also says MMDAs and the public sector in general must deliver output that is commensurate with their earnings. I mean, you can't argue with that. Deliver output commensurate with your earnings, right? You're asking for more. Show us what you're giving us in return in terms of output. But let's break this a bit more down. If you pull up his entire speech, he also gave us a certain breakdown here, because we look at the informal sector, which is mainly the public sector. They contribute some 75% to GDP. So that's a huge part of what this country is producing, the wealth of this country. 75%. So the workers can probably look and they say, yeah, but we're doing a lot. 75% of everything that this country is worth, and in terms of GDP, we make it happen. The huge informal sector contributes only 25% to our GDP. And the single spine is a key question here, because as we now have learned, and we'll get into this a bit more, it is the basis of what the workers are currently earning. And the key question then becomes, is a single spine factoring in productivity? It was introduced in 2010 to promote equity with the public sector. So ensuring that public sector workers receive equal salaries for equal work done. Equal salaries, equal work done across board. So you have all the disparities in there. Sektekpe, when he superintended over this, said something interesting. He says the migration, the quote, the migration and the overruns have overshadowed the productivity side of the single spine. And that is true, because we are beginning to learn today that although embedded in the single spine was a need to evaluate workers and measure their productivity as against what they are earning, Sektekpe then, as the finance minister, admitted that having implemented a single spine, we seem to have forgotten the productivity question, the migration overruns, he says. And then rolling out the second phase was to connect salary to productivity. That was the intention, that the second phase, make sure we are measuring their productivity and paying them based on what they produce, right? And then of course, Erlang Crowd was on the show today on the Super Morning Show, and he gave us some very interesting insight as well. Thankfully, he is with us, so we can get a bit more into this. I mean, he also affirms the position of Sektekpe back in the day that we haven't managed enough to implement the single spine to bring in the productivity as a measure. But so what is the burden that we are carrying when it comes to public sector workers? The increment in base pay of public sector workers since 2010. Now, here's the picture that the workers will jump onto. They say, but if you look at this graph and you do a line there, the workers' base pay has been on a consistent decline. So what are you talking about productivity? The question of the chicken and the egg will come into play. What comes first? Do you give me more salary and then you expect productivity, or productivity first before pay, or both go together? It's a very interesting question that the workers are agitating and say, you don't resource me, you don't pay me well. And there's a famous quote that always goes, the government pretends to pay the workers pretend to work. So you see here, in 2012, if you draw the graph, where base pay went up 18%, it dropped significantly to 10%, and consistently has been a decline if you do the line graph here. So workers, in terms of increases, has been lower and lower and lower. 2020, we're talking about 7%. That was last year. That was major agitation. The year before that, 4%. That is so low in terms of the increases. So why are we demanding productivity? How do you pay if you are increasing people's base pay by 4%? What do you expect? Is the question that we've asked, has been asked since this matter came up. And then the weight of compensation of employees on government expenditure is very, very huge. This is one of the most talked about subjects on PMX. We always do this, because if you look at this, the reason why we must have this conversation about productivity is because of this picture. Because the weight of the compensation is so significant that we cannot just pay the workers 35 billion and not expect that they're giving us something in return for all this money that we are spending, because consistently over time, the expenditure line up here is competing. The only thing that was beating this was what we are paying for our loans and debt, right? But then last year, this exchanged places. So we're talking about 16 billion. We're talking about 2022, 35.8 billion. That's a lot of money just to pay compensation. In fact, the argument goes, once we pay workers, there's very little in the kitty for all of us to get roads, etc. Your school fees, etc., that government is paying for. Everything else is going to workers. And so it's a really good time to ask the workers a big question. Yes, you want more pay. We know the economy is hard. We know cost of inflation has been terrible. We know it's eating away. Yeah, it's okay. You ask for it. But whilst you're doing that, we also need to ask you a question. What about the productivity? My guests are joining me. Erlang Crowd is here, representing the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. Joining me here on PM Express. Also joining me, is Nagrat. I like Nagrat. Why? Because they today have held a press conference. They have outlined a series of actions, industrial action, that will lead to eventual withdrawal of services because they want cola. You know what cola is? It is not what they chew in the villages. It is called the cost of living allowance, because they say cost of living is unbearable now. Give us some allowance. Okay, yeah, fine, no problem. But what about productivity? We'll ask them that question. And then we'll also speak to the, thank you very much. That's the government's decision right there. And Prof, thank you for joining us. And he did this inaugural lecture. I must congratulate you, by the way, for getting us to have this conversation. The timing of your inaugural lecture was perfect. Whoever set the time for you did us a great good, because conversations are happening. We need to have this conversation. Also joining me tonight is my good friend with the GMA, Ghana Medical Association. They're also public sector workers. Are the doctors, let's say nurses in the health sector, giving us value for money when you go to your hospital. Are you happy with the service you're getting from your favorite doctor in your favorite government clinic or hospital? We'll ask him a few more questions there when he joins us. I mean, they are asking for more too. We'll see when we return from this break. Stay with me. My guest joining me tonight is very delighted to have Professor Samuel Kobena-Eni. We are speaking to him first as the man whose inaugural lecture started this national conversation. And Prof, congratulations are in order. It's important to state that now we're just not going to say doctor, we'll say Prof to your name because of that inaugural lecture, and how important that lecture has become in the national conversation at the time when everybody's asking for more. Of course, he's also the government statistician, and so he joins us with his thoughts on this. In the studio with me is El Nagrat, is the Director of Research at the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. El, thank you very much.
Acting
Acting Director of Research, okay, and a senior, trailblazing journalist in the field. So, of course, I'm in good company. Also with us is Dr. Titus Bayo, he's the General Secretary of the Ghana Medical Association. And he also joins us. He's because they work in a public sector. He's a public sector worker himself. And so I'm grateful, Dr. Bayo, for your time. And then Jacob Anaba.
Thank you, Evans.
Thank you, yes. Jacob Anaba is the Vice President of the National Association of Graduate Teachers. They held a press conference today, and they were very clear, starting with a roadmap. If you go to the schools that Nagrat teachers are, you find red, armbands and red, signs there, because I read they want, they want cola.
Thank you, Evans.
Yes, they want
that
cola.
will be in June, at the end of June.
Yes. Oh, sorry, say that again.
That will be at the end of June.
At the end of June, okay. Oh, so today was to tell El Nagrat and co that we are coming. So you better fix our problems.
That is it.
Okay. Okay, I like that. Professor Eni, let me start with you. One of the things that happened after we've all heard your inaugural address was a letter that was written to you by Clocks, and I think it's a perfect place to start. They were simply asking you to provide further and better particulars about the conclusions you reached. So explain to me in simple terms, in a short few minutes, how you arrived at the computation that on the average, workers are earning over 3,000 cedis, but the productivity is slightly over 1,000.
Thank you very much, Evans, and good evening, colleague, panelists, and to all our listeners. I really like the point of departure for this conversation because I think that will place the discussion in its right context. So let's keep in mind that the topic for the inaugural lecture was on data policy transitions. And I was looking at this from the perspective of economic variables. And the central message that I wanted to put out there is that we are using data in varied ways, sourcing them from different outlets and using them to make policy. And Ghana is yet to reach outcomes and impacts of most of the policy interventions that it puts out there. So let's keep in mind the topic for the inaugural lecture, which was simply on data policy transitions, looking at it from the perspective of economic variables. And what I sought to do, among other 11 factors, was to identify a set of factors that I argue that they are missing in the policy discourse in the country, and identify 5 factors, of which the issue of productivity was one of it. Evans, I really like the idea that you shared the fact that 75%, if you look at our GDP, 75% comes from the public sector and the formal sector, which is dominated by the public sector, and 25% is made of the 75% of informal employees that we have. So that was the starting point. I proceeded to argue that, which was the first of the 5 variables, to argue that if you compute inequality within the public sector, inequality is very high. And from an economics point of view, I said you can decide to calculate inequality using consumption expenditure as the indicator. And that is what we do. If you look at our National Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies, we use consumption expenditure to discuss the issue of inequality. And my argument is that once you get to the level of expenditure because of transfers, because of remittances, it dampens the inequality that we have from the earnings perspective. So although I talk about public sector, I'm emphasizing the inequalities in earnings within the public sector. I go ahead to do this from the salary point of view and the earnings point of view. And I go ahead also to use the Ghana Living Standard Survey to demonstrate the inequality from an income point of view. Once you do that, you move away from an inequality of about 0.42 to inequalities ranging between 0.71 and 0.94, depending on whether you are using salaries, you are using the income data from the Living Standard Survey, or you are using allowances from the public sector. So that clarity is provided ahead of the discussion on productivity. Mm-hmm. In the measurement of productivity, 2 things. One is, how do we begin to know output at the individual level? So I took the 2021 gross domestic product, which was about 175 billion, that is real after you discounted for the effect of inflation. I took the 2021 population housing census, looked at the population that I employed. I did not compute GDP per capita. What I did compute was GDP per employee. And from the 2021 population housing census, we had about 9.9 million people that were employed. Okay. So that gave us a very crude measure of output. And please let me clarify this. The 1460 is not output for the public sector. The 1460 is output for the entire country, taking into consideration our GDP for 2021, which stood at 175 billion annually, the number of people who are employed, and then came up with a 1460. It's either 1460 or 1420, depending on whether you want to look at it from per employee perspective per month, or you discount for the effect of hours worked. The whole idea was, once you get this, compare it with the earnings. Mm-hmm. And the earnings that we used were just a proxy, because we don't have earnings. The last time we collected data on earnings from a survey was during the GLSS 7. That was when we did the Ghana Living Standard Survey. So that is the data that we have on earnings. So I didn't want to go 5 years back. And then I picked the earnings from the public sector as a proxy for earnings. And as I said, Evans, I wanted to demonstrate that even if it's difficult to measure something, taking it out of the policy discourse does not help us that much, because as a country, we always want to improve on our GDP. And the only way we can improve on our GDP is to begin to measure what our output per person is, what our output per hour is. And on that basis, you can incrementally increase your GDP. So this is how I went about the computation of earnings and output, based on one output for the overall country, not the public sector, and looking at the public sector, proxying it with earnings, and say that look at the variations.
Okay.
So it generated the discussion.
Yes. So that is what came down to the specifics of average earning 3,420, productivity 1,420.
Yes.
Okay, so those are hard facts. Now he's explained that. Let me go to the workers then, and because that then, now that they understand the context of where you came from, let me go to Nagrat. Mr. Naba, let me come to you first. Now you've heard, those are hard facts and analysis that, Prof had done on this. Do you accept that reality, that now that gap exists and we need to find a way, now that we are having conversations about, you had a press conference today, you want more, you want cola, that we need to bridge that gap. You need to also show us that you want to bridge that gap between how much you're already earning and how much you're actually producing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Evans. Greetings to my co-panelists. Our profession, the teaching profession, is to develop the human holistically, and that includes the hearts and the mind. So it involves forming, training, and nurturing. A holistic development of a human being, intellectual, psychological, emotional, and what have you. I don't know what tape that we'll use in measuring it. These parameters. It is very difficult to measure it. But the teacher does all this under very strenuous conditions. Most of us are serving in very deprived areas, and we are doing our best. This year, last year, when the results came out, we are applauded because of what we did as teachers. We went to West Africa and we were the best. We topped. Ghana topped because of what we did in the classroom. If you look at what the president said at the May Day celebration, he said that the public sector workers were 700,000. 700,000. The GES has 342,000. That constitutes the 700,000.
That's huge.
The average, yes, almost half.
Yeah.
A majority
Oh goodness, I hope I haven't lost him, because that's a very
of our members are below the rank of assistant director 2. Majority of them, about 70% of them. The higher numbers, the few numbers that is at the managerial level, they take over 3,000 as their net. And those under take less than 2,000. If you do the computation, we don't take even 8 billion out of that amount, 31 billion that the president stated.
So clarify, you're saying that the highest paid teacher, both at the senior high school and throughout, is earning 3,000 cedis.
I said assistant director 1.
Okay, is that the highest? Is that the highest level? Is that the highest level?
Yes, the highest level is at 24.24.
Okay, so and how much does that translate into salary?
About 5,000.
Okay, above 5,000.
And those are just one person.
Okay.
That's the director general.
Okay.
And we have 2 deputies.
Okay.
Then you come down, you have very few numbers. So when you come to the assistant director 2 downwards, they are more. Okay. And they take less than 2,000.
Okay.
If you do this computation, we don't take 8 billion out of the 31 billion that the president stated as the expenditure that is made for productivity.
Okay.
So you see that we, the teacher or the teachers, the amount that we are taking from what we get as productivity is very low. It's very low as compared to what we do in the classroom.
But let me ask you a fundamental question, which Prof is asking us to consider. In spite of the challenges, and everybody really has challenges with resources, in spite of the challenges, do you accept that now that you're asking for more at the table with government, employers, and yourself, the workers, the tripartite committee, it is fair for government and employers to be asking you to now link what you're asking for to productivity? We should try and measure that. Do you accept that? That should be part of the conversation now.
We agree very much. And when we want to do that, the teacher must be paid more than what is receiving today.
Okay.
We agree very much. And we are the people who ask for equal pay, equal work for equal pay.
Okay, so stay with me. Let me expand this. Let me bring in the doctors into this conversation quickly, and I'll come to Elle, because Elle has a very interesting dimension to this that will also enlighten us. But Dr. Bayo, do you agree with that last comment? That first of all, at the negotiation table, has there ever been a conversation when you're asking for more and you're negotiating with government about, okay, yeah, I mean, we've heard you, but show us that you're producing enough, your productivity is matching what you're asking for. Has there ever been that conversation at the table? Hello, doctor. Please unmute for me if you mute, because I can't hear you, Dr. Bayo.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
sorry about that.
I can hear you now.
Good evening. Yeah, and let me begin by congratulating Prof on his inaugural lecture, and then good evening to co-panelists. I would start by saying that, yes, the issue of productivity has never been lost on the worker. And I am aware that as part of the single spine, productivity was seriously discussed when we evaluated the work on about 13-point scale. Productivity was discussed. And recently, the Minister of Employment and Labor Relations led the labor conference in Kwewu, and productivity again was discussed. How to make sure that we match productivity with the wages or salaries we earn. So I don't think that has been lost on anyone. And I think it is an important thing. However, if you are looking at why the productivity is low, as assessed by Prof, I think it will be very helpful if we have a disaggregated data. And I think, as Prof has mentioned, this was only one out of 5 areas he was talking about, and his inaugural lecture was not on productivity alone. But if we want to discuss the productivity subject, we need to look at, disaggregate the data into various segments of the workforce. If I speak, for instance, for the health sector, for the doctor, there are various metrics worldwide in assessing the productivity of a doctor. It's not new. If you take at the clinic setting, the number of cases a doctor will see, the number of surgeries a surgeon will perform. If you're a consultant, the number of doctors you supervise per a certain period of time, all this can be computed. But Evans, the fundamental question, which is the reason why productivity is an issue here, in my opinion, is that of the employer and not the employee. What happens in the private sector? You hire the right caliber of people, hire the right number for the right job, pay them right, and demand the productivity. Set the KPIs, create the environment, and if they don't meet it, you fire them. What is happening in our environment? People are hiring and using numbers for political gain. I employ 70,000 nurses. You employ 50,000 nurses. Was it based on any staff norms or staffing norms? I've engaged 70,000 teachers. You've engaged 60,000 teachers. Was it based on any staffing norms? Did we set any KPIs for them? Have you challenged the Ghanaian worker to produce and the person has not been able to produce as much as you wish? Did you create that environment? And let's not forget that we are in an opium market. And in our sector, the Ghanaian doctor is much sought after in other countries. And when they relocate there, they excel very well. Why? Because the person employing them has set the KPIs and the environment for them to deliver.
So you're saying that in the health sector, clarify, in the health sector, KPIs have not been set for you.
That is not what I have said. Okay. But I'm saying that if anybody is coming up to talk about productivity, the person should come out and tell us that when I engage X number of doctors, I knew that Kolebu needed 6,000 or 600 doctors. I've engaged 600 and not 800. And the 600, this is what I've asked them to do. And they have not been able to meet it before you can talk about the question of productivity.
But are there KPIs in the health sector?
In some parts, yes. But is it down to the individual person? No. Okay. At the management level, what do we see? And I can tell you, you will go to major hospitals in this country where you have a lot of surgeons who can operate with all their skills. And they go to theater and the number of patients they operate per day is far less than what is due them.
So people are underemployed. People are underemployed in some of the...
To a large extent, in some aspects. And in some other aspects, people are, I don't know if the word is overemployed. You will go to a district hospital and there's one doctor who never goes on leave throughout the year. He travels and people will die. He cannot attend any function because he's the only person. How do we talk about productivity of that person? So you see, if we want to narrow it down, that's what I talk about. Get the right number for the right job, create the right environment, and then assess them by the KPIs that you set up. So
can I put it simply? You're saying if there's a question around productivity, as Prof has found, you can't blame the worker. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think that if you take that same worker and put that same worker in the private sector, you are a journalist. You have KPIs you must meet with multimedia.
Absolutely.
You have counterparts in the public broadcasting setting.
Yeah. Like Alankra when he was at GBC.
Yes, ask him, was he having to meet the same KPIs? Is he appraised the same way? And is he fired if he doesn't meet them?
Okay. That's an interesting point. Stay with me. Stay with me. I'll come to you. Prof, there's a question I'll come to you after I've heard L. And that question came from Dr. Beyo, but was asked in the first reactions that we got, which is that we want a disaggregated data and that you treated the workers as a homogeneous group and that if you really break it down, the story may be different. I mean, is there an aspect of that that we could sort of appreciate? I'll come to you on that. But L, let's go to the main question. So you just heard Dr. Beyo say you can't blame the worker because you aren't measuring, the employer is not measuring. So what do you expect him to do? Why? You can't talk about productivity when you're not measuring at all. At the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, fair wages, I like the way you call. You've said today on the Super Morning Show that we are not measuring productivity at all. It's not part of the consideration for determining salary and base pay. Not yet. Okay, so clearly then, it's true, right, that you can't blame the worker.
Yeah, good evening. Congratulations to Prof and good evening to our Nagrat and GMA representatives. So it is right. If you go into the single spine pay policy, the beginning of the whole policy, you remember there was a point in this country where the public are clamoring. They were complaining that the work culture in the public service in the public sector wasn't encouraging. You go looking for certain documents, you go looking to register stuff. You want things from government employees and they are delayed.
The proverbial you go and somebody's taking lotto, and they're sleeping.
Those things.
That kind of thing,
yeah. So then that conversation came up as to there must be some form of public sector reform. And then what you said earlier on came in saying, okay, what about the salaries? We are performing this way because our salaries are low. So before you look at public sector reform, before you demand productivity, you must look at our salary. So that chicken and egg thing came in. Which one should we deal with first? And eventually, a whole ministry for public sector reform was set up. Remember, it was headed by Dr. Pakwesi Inkum. Pakwesi Indum, yeah.
Public sector reform secretariat.
Secretariat, yeah. But it was a ministry, and the secretariat was also working alongside. And then the single spine was birthed, and so that became rationalization of the salary. After which now you have to rationalize the work. I had fancy friends when I was a kid. They used to sing, "Where do you account social?" So more or less, we've rationalized pay. Now we are supposed to look into the productivity bit of it. So it is in order. It was productivity was glove in hand part of the single spine pay policy. So although we are yet to roll in this phase, we have not actually gone into it. It is not part of the salary. If you pick up a public servant's salary, the pay slip, you find the base pay, you find the allowances that they are entitled to. In Korea, performance bonus also comes in. But at the moment...
So fundamentally, right now in Ghana, we are paying workers like Titus Beyo, like Mr. Anaba, not based on output, not based on productivity. We're just paying them.
Well, if you put it that way, it sounds as if, okay, let's get a bunch of guys into the offices and throw money at them, but that's not the case. Yes, of course, they are performing certain roles. The doctors, when you go to the hospitals, you see patients being treated. When you go to the schools, lectures are going on. When you go to Registrar General, people are getting registered. You go to passport office, your passports are being given to you. But what is absent at the moment is measuring them.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, what targets do we set? And then how do we then link them into the different institutions and then the different departments, and then how it goes down to the employee. You know, at the private sector, it is very simple. We set your employer will set targets for you at the beginning of the year. You are appraised around it is reviewed around the middle of the year. Around this time, most institutions should be doing their review, and then at the end of the year, there is appraisal. But then in the public sector, it's supposed to happen in different institutions, different state agencies, and then we collate the results.
Do they actually do this? Do they actually? So, for example, Nagrat, I'll come to Nagrat. So, is somebody sitting down with each teacher and saying, at the beginning of the term, these are your KPIs. You need to mark this number of scripts. You need to make sure your students pass at least numbers. Is somebody doing this before, when they come to fair wages, when the salary conversation start, you go and check. You say, give me the KPIs for the teachers. And then you use that and say, okay, you met 50%. So you're going to get 50% increase in your salary. Is that happening? No.
To be frank, we conducted 2 pilots, one on a smaller scale and one on quite a bigger scale than the first one. And the responses were not that encouraging. Let's say about 50%. This morning I was dodging around.
When you say responses?
I say institutions that have actually done it. Okay, because you have to have conducted it and then do your appraisals and bring the results to us. But most institutions hadn't done it. If they had done it, they were not submitting them on time. That could mean that the targets were being set late, which is not proper, because the Public Services Commission has an instrument that should be used, and that instrument states the period within which you should set your targets. One institution can set their targets in January, and another institution delays till about March before they set their targets. Then what are you evaluating? And there is a period within the year, around June or so, that you are supposed to do your appraisal. And then there's a period within the year, at the end of the year, when you're supposed to submit to do the complete appraisal.
Let me guess. The pilot was to inform a bigger rollout across the country.
Exactly.
But let me guess. Because of what happened, it was abandoned. It wasn't rolled out the way you intended at the beginning.
Okay.
The pilot failed.
The pilot came up with some revelations, and we are supposed to conduct a third.
How long ago was the pilot?
That was somewhere 2 years ago.
Yeah,
but since of course COVID came in, so most workers were not in the offices and all that, and so the phase is yet to be rolled out, and we are looking into that. The analysis there were also some analysis that were conducted to find out what the challenges actually were.
So question, now that we know what the numbers are, thanks to Prof, and they've done Fair Wages Salaries Committee good service there. So if you're not measuring them based on productivity, what are we measuring them on?
At the moment, well, some institutions are doing their measurement. There were some, some institutions, but you know, when they come to the table, they come at unions and with bargaining certificates, etc. Exactly.
I bet at that table, nobody's going back to that individual institution to say it's about the group, what the group wants.
Not yet.
Exactly.
Not yet.
Yeah. So if we are not doing that, then we are not. What are we measuring them on then? So productivity is out of the question. So what else is there?
Productivity is yet at the moment. What roles they are performing.
Yeah.
Of course, to get on the single spine salary structure, like Doc said, there are 13 factors of job evaluation that we look into, and then you are placed on the structure that determines what salary you earn. And let's remember, around April every year, the parties go to the table and negotiate for your base pay for the coming year. Okay. So that's mostly what happens.
So we can't blame the workers. You agree with that?
I do agree.
You can't blame the workers. Okay. So Prof, I mean, that's the revelation. I mean, so, but let's come to some of the specifics. And Titus Bayo raised the point, and I think UTAG also raised the point that can we break this down a bit more, because the workers are different. What do you say to that question?
Thank you, Evans, once again. So definitely we can break it down. The question is whether the policymaker is prepared to give that data out for us to have that conversation. And I deliberately preceded my discussion on productivity with inequality. So, Evans, that clearly tells us that once you disaggregate it, the story will be different. And that is why I emphasize that inequality in earnings possibly should be within the public sector, possibly should be the start of our conversation. So that once the government wants to deal with it within the public sector, you know how this 3420 will change if you give yourself different earnings and bands. This 3420 is definitely being carried away by outliers in terms of those who are earning extremely high. And as was indicated earlier, we have quite a number of people who are at the base, like my colleague from Nagrat was talking about. So the simple response is that, yes, once you disaggregate it, the story will be different. And please let us not forget that the output should not be the national output, that the output should be sector specific because the parameters would vary. And all that I sought to do was, let's start having this conversation in spite of the difficulties associated with the measurement.
So, Prof, give me your quick reaction. Now you've heard the Fair Wages Salaries Commission say, really, we are not measuring productivity at all. It's not part of the conversation yet when we sit around the table to talk about workers' salary. And I listened to your inaugural address, and you make the point that when you met UTAG, you made the point to them that please go back and start thinking about that. What's your reaction to this revelation that this is not part of the conversation yet?
I mean, I did also indicate, Evans, that a conversation has started between Ghana Statistical Service and Fair Wages and Salaries Commission on how to really operationalize the measurement of productivity. But it's not only these two institutions that are going to make this work. We need a collaborative support of all the other institutions, especially institutions that produce these data sets just by the performance of the administrative responsibilities. So definitely the Controller and Accountant General's department has all the data on the earnings, and that is why we're saying that at the end of the year, at least, we should give an account of how statistics is informing our economy. And that is not happening just because some of the things are difficult to measure and some of the things, for some reason, we don't want to bring them to the table for discussion.
Okay, let me bring the workers in now. Ms. Adaba, so at Nagrat, now that we've heard the Professor make the point that he's now talking to Fair Wages, so that how do you implement this productivity measure in a conversation around salary? Are teachers ready to subject themselves to strict productivity measures in the determination for salaries? Like all teachers around the world in Western countries are measured. I taught for a while in a private school, and the headmaster was hard on paying you based on script marked performance of the pupils in your class, the completion of lecture notes. It was so objective. You can't run away. And each had assigned figures to it. So either 10% in the markings, 20% to how many of your students pass a certain grade, and they calculate that, and then that goes into your next year's salary. Are the teachers ready to subject themselves to something like that at the schools?
Evans, as we speak, before a teacher is promoted, you go through appraiser performance for you to be assessed whether you are eligible for promotion or not.
Okay.
And that is a form of measuring your output so that you can move to the next grade. As El said, now productivity is equated to either a grade or a level. So if you are at a particular grade, that is the amount that you take. If you proceed to the next level, you take higher.
How often? So how often do you have this promotional assessment?
3-4 years. 3-4 years.
So within the 3-4. So within the 3 years, what happens?
Yes.
If you sat there,
the 3 years,
what happens?
Within the 3 years, we have the head of department, the academic head, and the headmaster, who have to assess your work daily, weekly, and monthly or termly.
When you go to the
And
table,
that's-
thank God you are here because you hold the bargaining certificate. When you sit at the table for the base pay, minimum wage, etc., do you go there with the results from the analysis you just mentioned, where that's
For now, no. For now, as I said, it is based on the grade and the level.
okay?
So we are not using that.
So what you're
as a
telling me is
measure.
that the COLA you are asking for now, the base pay you are going to fight for, you want it based on no link to productivity.
COLA is based on hardship.
No, so you take, let's take COLA. Let's take COLA away because it's cost of living. Let's take COLA away.
Yeah.
The base pay you are going to ask for, the salary increase you want, you are telling me in good conscience that you're going to take that, you're going to demand it, possibly with strike.
Yes, very.
When productivity is not linked to it.
Productivity is linked to it because per section 113 of the Labor Act 651, we are mandated to negotiate for the minimum wage. The reason being that when the factors of production change, then you have to also pay the worker an amount, to equal what he has done for the period.
So what about base pay? What about base pay?
Immediately the minimum wage changes, then the base pay must change.
So it's automatic.
It's an equation.
So
it's an equation.
It's automatic.
Yeah, it's an equation. So they work together.
Okay, but I need to ask the same question of Dr. Bayo. Dr. Bayo, really in good conscience, in good conscience, right? El has confirmed, as of now, productivity is not. But in good conscience, you're going to go to the negotiation table for minimum wage and base pay, and you want your salary to go up, knowing very well that, El and his team and government are not going to link to productivity, and you take that money when your colleagues in the private sector, in the private hospitals, they are being marked strictly to what they actually produce. In good conscience, you take that.
Interesting way you put it, Evans. But when something is not being measured, there are about different possibilities for the result if it were measured. It could be that you are actually overproducing. It could be that you are producing as expected, or you are underproducing. I can tell you confidently that if productivity was measured today, the average Ghanaian doctor will be overproducing as expected of his employer. And so we will welcome with open hands that this measurement is done. And let's remember, as El mentioned earlier, we are not being paid in vacuum. We are paid based on an evaluation of our job, what we actually do. The risk was evaluated at the point of entry into the payroll. What is missing is measuring this daily or yearly or monthly or quarterly, as the case might be, by the employer to see if you're actually meeting that or exceeding that. But there's abundant evidence that the doctor in Ghana is working way beyond what is expected of a public sector worker. And when we did the calculation of number of hours of work, it is something we always ask of from Fair Wages and Salaries Commission and the employer that they are not willing to tell us or give us. If they were allowing us to work per number of hours allowed, and after that, I can use the rest for my private time for whatever I wanted, every doctor will welcome it.
Okay.
Because I tell you, sometimes we are on duty for 24 hours and working and on our feet. So I can say without a shadow of doubt that the average doctor in Ghana is working beyond any productivity margin, surely because of our shortage in numbers, the workload, and the demand that is placed on us, and the trying conditions under which we work.
But to both Dr. Bayo and Anaba, same question, and final question to both of you. So I know how vehemently you fight when you want improved conditions of service. Both of you agree measuring productivity is important, and you welcome it. Now that you've begun the conversations around salary, are you prepared to commit to the millions who are watching you tonight to say, we want to go to the table and demand measure our productivity as part of the negotiations this year? Can you assure us that you go and make that demand?
As I said, the GMA, we are happy if government will measure our productivity.
No,
then I'm very sure
let's ask that. If government, I'm asking whether you will demand that at the table.
that they should measure it.
Yes.
We have always demanded it. They should tell us how many hours a doctor should work a week. And after that time, that they think that they are paying for this number of hours, you can use the rest of the time for whatever you wanted.
Let me hear Mr. Anna. Mr. Anna, very quickly, same question. Will you demand it?
Most definitely we will demand, because I know the teacher is working more than what he is supposed to do.
Okay.
The productivity is very high.
Okay, L.
I applaud them. I respect.
We are going to hold them to it.
Yes, of course.
But they will come to your table.
We're happy.
You've already started the conversation.
Let me take this opportunity to inform organized labor that very soon Fair Wages and Salaries Commission will be writing to them to ask them to submit their appraisals for the year. And we will need them to put pressure on their employers, so to speak, the head of your institution.
Thank you very much. You're writing to them. We are not ending. I'm just shaking.
Yeah, of course.
We've done that. They should send their appraisal.
Yeah, we've done that before.
It's going to be part of the conversation about salary.
Yeah, you've had a situation where you have to chase institutions, make calls, be nice and all that. And there will be promises and which are never fulfilled. Sometimes when the results come, they are delayed. So I want to challenge organized labor that in as much as they are in for it, they must ask their employers. When the letters come, we'll make sure that they get copies. They must put pressure on their employers to do it and submit. Mind you, performance management isn't what happens at the end of the year when you have appraisal results. It begins at the beginning of the year. The targets you set, what goes into the targets. Now, you know, we are looking for the functions of the organization and the objects of the organization. Sometimes some institutions set targets from just about 2 functions. So you end up having just a couple of directorates and working and others being more or less redundant. You want your targets to come from all the directorates and all your functions. Let
me clarify. So these appraisals, is it going to be factored into the negotiations that are currently going for minimum wage-based pay?
At the moment, I can't say that for this year.
So what's the point of asking them?
No, the point is, of course, if you're going to set targets, you'll be setting targets for the subsequent year.
So that's next year.
That's supposed to be for.
So the possibility is
right now, if you're setting targets at this time,
it's impossible. So what you're saying, that what you're going to ask them to do is a possibility is going to feed into what they get next year.
Yes. It's supposed to feed into what you get next. So the first thing is a majority of your functions must reflect in there. The second point is your clients. Let's hear this and let's hear this clear. Public sector productivity is meaningless if it is not linked directly to private sector productivity, wealth creation and job creation. Okay. And this is the sentiment of the National Public Sector Reform Strategy, that public sector reform must feed the man on the street. You may be a hospital. Your productivity on paper is all beautiful. But your clients, your patients are out there. They are not there. They will stay in the outpatients department.
So you're linking that to that.
How many patients are you treating per day?
So,
Even if you are in the court, how many cases?
Do I hear you say that going forward, possibly from next year, yes, now the single spine will now activate its productivity measure? Yeah,
for next year.
Because you're asking for the appraisals.
I'm not saying that as in, okay, this is what is happening, because it involves, it's a multi-sectoral thing. It involves Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, Ministry of Employment, National Public Sector Reform Secretariat, NDPI, National Development.
But conversations have begun to make this part of it.
Yes.
And as Prof said, that the conversation is started a conversation with you.
Fair Wages, and
try and apply that.
A great gentleman. So we want them to impress upon their employers that, okay, when these results come, because we want to challenge government, we want to tell government that we are overproducing, and we want that evidence. Yeah, well, they are.
You said it boldly tonight.
So at the end of the day, if you're but let's have this at the back of your mind. When you are setting targets for the following year, you have to listen to what your clients have been saying, what complaints.
So it has to be based on client
centered. It must be client centered.
So Nagrat has to satisfy the parents,
the patients that come
teachers,
to them. How many patients are we treating? And like you said earlier, education. Yeah. How many students are passing? We can't be hearing these ridiculous passing figures, and then we say, and then yet on paper,
there's no evidence about that.
Yeah, on paper they've performed very well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. This must be music to your ears. That appraisals are going to be asked. 30 seconds.
Indeed. As I said, the whole idea was between data and policy. Let's really make Ghana a data-led driven country.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to be holding you all, Nagrat and GMA, to all your declarations tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening.